She was 7 years old, she was alone, and she knew for a fact. The man behind her wasn't stopping. Her heart was pounding out of her chest. She needed help now, but instead of running toward a police officer, she ran into a dark alleyway and did something that looked crazy. She ran straight toward a massive Iron King's biker and whispered 5 words that would change both of their lives forever. You might think you know how this ends. But what this monster did to protect her proves you should never judge a book by its cover. We're about to see a massive rescue mission unfold. Before the engines start, make sure you're subscribed to join the ride. And I want to see how far this story travels. Drop a comment below telling me what country or city you are watching from right now. I read every single one. The man squirmed against the rough brickwork of the alley, his expensive loafers scraping uselessly against the pavement as Silas hoisted him a full 6 inches off the ground. Silas didn't shout. Shouting was for men who needed to prove they were dangerous, and Silas' tank, Mercer, had nothing to prove. He simply leaned in, his massive frame blocking out the fading sunlight, and tightened his grip on the stranger's windpipe. Not enough to kill, but enough to promise that death was an option. The smell of fear coming off the man in the suit was acrid, mixing with the scent of stale trash and old motor oil. "Phone," Silas grunted. The word was low, a rumble of thunder trapped in a chest cavity. The man stammered, his eyes darting toward the alley entrance where he hoped for a witness, or perhaps a savior. He found neither. He only saw little Mia, still clutching her teddy bear, watching with wide, unblinking eyes from behind the rear wheel of Silas's parked Harley. "I said phone." Silas slammed the man back against the wall, the dull thud echoing off the brick. With a trembling hand, the predator reached into his jacket pocket. Silas snatched the device before it cleared the fabric, shoving the screen in front of the man's sweating face. "Unlock it now." The Face ID clicked. The screen unlocked. Silas swiped through the open apps with a thumb the size of a sausage, his eyes narrowing as he found a messaging app. It wasn't just a stalker's collection of photos, it was logistics. A map was open with a dropped pin at a private estate 10 miles out of town, accompanied by a single text message received 3 minutes ago. "Package ready? Clients arriving at 20:00. Silas checked his watch. 19. 1 hour. The realization hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't a random creep following a little girl home. This was a pickup. And if there were clients arriving, Mia wasn't the only merchandise they were expecting. The man in the suit managed to wheeze out a desperate lie. "Look, buddy, you don't know who you're messing with. Just take my wallet and walk away. I can make you rich." Silas looked at the man, then over his shoulder at Mia. He thought of his niece, the one he hadn't been fast enough to save 5 years ago. The ghost of that failure lived in his knuckles, in the sleepless nights, in the whiskey he drank to drown the noise. He turned back to the man, his eyes devoid of anything human. "I don't want your money," Silas whispered. "I want your fear." He dropped the man, and before the trafficker could scramble to his feet, Silas delivered a single, calculated kick to the temple. The man crumpled to the concrete, unconscious. Silas didn't waste a second looking at the body. He pulled his own phone, his thumb hovering over the emergency dial. The cops, they would need statements. They would need a warrant. They would need probable cause to breach a private estate. By the time the paperwork was signed, 8:00 p.m. would have come and gone, and those kids would be vanished into the wind. He scrolled past 911 and hit the contact labeled Prez. "Church is in session," Silas said the moment the line connected. "Code black." Where, the voice on the other end was gravel and iron. "Sending coordinates. Bring the sledgehammers. We have 1 hour. 10 minutes later, the alleyway was no longer silent. A black van screeched to a halt at the entrance, followed by a young prospect on a beat-up Sportster. The prospect, a kid named Sketch who looked too young to shave, jumped out. Silas guided Mia toward him. For the first time, his face softened. He knelt down, treating her with a gentleness that seemed impossible for hands that large. "Mia, this is Sketch. He's going to take you to a safe house. My family is there. There are cartoons and pizza, and nobody is going to come near you. Do you understand?" Mia nodded, clutching the bear. "Are you coming?" "I have to go to work," Silas said, standing up and pulling his leather cut tight. "I have to make sure the bad man doesn't wake up." As the van sped away with Mia safe, the atmosphere shifted. The sun began to bleed into the horizon, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. From the distance, a sound emerged that shook the windows of the nearby storefronts. It wasn't the chaotic noise of city traffic. It was the synchronized, rhythmic thrum of 22 V-twin engines. The Iron Kings had arrived. They merged onto the highway in a terrifying phalanx of chrome and black leather, taking up all 3 lanes. At the front rode Silas, his face set in a grim mask, flanking the club president. Behind them, 20 seasoned outlaws rode in tight formation, their cuts flying in the wind. To the commuters shrinking in their sedans, locking their doors as the bikers roared past, they looked like trouble. They looked like criminals. They looked like a gang descending on the city to tear it apart. The drivers didn't know that the men they feared were the only hope a dozen children had left. The road stretched out before them, the asphalt blurring under their tires as the speedometer needles climbed past 90. The sun dipped below the tree line, plunging the world into twilight, but the Kings rode on. They were no longer just a motorcycle club living on the fringe of society. Tonight, as they roared toward the estate with vengeance in their hearts, they were the cavalry. The GPS didn't lead them to the rotting industrial district or the abandoned warehouses by the docks, where the city stored its rust and secrets. Instead, the winding road climbed higher, away from the grime of the city and into the pristine silence of Oak Ridge estates. The air here smelled of manicured lawns and jasmine, not exhaust and desperation. It was a place for senators, CEOs, and people who paid a lot of money to never be looked at too closely. The column of 20 motorcycles slowed as they approached a set of 12-foot wrought iron gates flanked by stone lions. A guard booth, sleek and modern, sat like a pillbox guarding the entrance. A uniformed man stepped out, his hand resting casually on a holstered sidearm. He didn't look like a rent-a-cop. He moved with the tight, coiled efficiency of a mercenary. He held up a hand, his face a mask of professional disdain as he took in the leather cuts, the road grime, and the sheer audacity of the Iron Kings. "Private event," the guard shouted over the idle rumble of the engines. "Turn it around, you're lost." Silas killed his engine. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by the ticking of cooling metal. He looked at the president, a gray-bearded giant named Bishop who nodded once. There was no negotiation here. They weren't lost. They were exactly where the coordinates on the stalker's phone said the package was being delivered. "We aren't turning around," Silas said, his voice carrying through the crisp evening air. The guard unsnapped his holster. "I said move along. This is a restricted area. Police are on speed dial." "Call them," Bishop growled. "They'll need someone to pick up the bodies." Before the guard could draw, the black support van that trailed the pack roared forward, accelerating through the gap between the bikes. The guard dove into the bushes just as the van's reinforced grille slammed into the center of the iron gates. There was a screech of tearing metal that sounded like a dying animal, followed by a thunderous boom as the lock sheared, and the heavy gates swung inward, twisted and broken. The roar of the motorcycles returned, louder this time, a collective war cry as the Iron Kings throttled through the breach. They tore up the perfectly raked gravel of the driveway, swarming the estate like a black tide. The main house was a sprawling mansion of glass and stone, bathed in warm, golden light. As the bikes skidded to a halt on the front lawn, the heavy oak doors burst open. Private security poured out, 6 men in tactical gear, batons extended, hands reaching for tasers and firearms. They were trained professionals, disciplined and organized, but they weren't ready for the Kings. The brawl was immediate and chaotic. Silas didn't bother dismounting gracefully. He let his bike drop and launched himself at the nearest security officer. The man raised a baton, but Silas caught the swing with a forearm like a tree trunk and drove a fist into the man's solar plexus. The guard folded, gasping for air that wouldn't come. Around them, the pristine lawn turned into a battlefield. Chains whipped through the air, helmets were used as battering rams, and the polite silence of the neighborhood was shattered by the sounds of breaking glass and shouting men. Silas didn't stay for the fight. He had a different objective. Leaving his brothers to handle the security detail, he kicked open the front door of the mansion. The foyer was marble and gold, a stark contrast to the violence erupting outside. He heard music, classical, soft, civilized, coming from down the hall. He followed it, his boots leaving muddy prints on the white stone. He found a set of double doors guarded by a man in a tuxedo who looked more like a butler than a bouncer. The man saw Silas, blood on his knuckles, eyes burning with a terrifying focus, and wisely stepped aside, raising his hands in surrender. Silas pushed past him and threw the doors open. It was a library. Leather armchairs, a fireplace crackling with warmth, and 5 men in suits holding crystal tumblers of scotch. They looked up, their conversations freezing. In the corner of the room, near a heavy bookshelf, was a door that looked out of place, reinforced steel with a keypad. "Who the hell are you?" one of the suits demanded, stepping forward. "Do you have any idea whose house this is?" Silas ignored him. He walked straight toward the steel door. The man in the suit, emboldened by his wealth or perhaps just stupid with arrogance, grabbed Silas's arm. "I'm talking to you, trash. Get out before I—" Silas spun, grabbing the man by the throat and slamming him onto a mahogany table. Crystal shattered. "Open the door," Silas snarled, leaning close enough that the man could smell the violence on him. "Open it, or I verify exactly how flammable this house is." The man scrambled, terrified, and punched a code into the keypad. The steel door hissed open. Silas shoved the man aside and stepped into the room beyond. It was soundproofed, devoid of windows, and smelled of stale air. Huddled together on mattresses on the floor were 8 children. They were silent, their eyes wide with a terror that had gone beyond screaming. They looked at Silas, a giant in leather and denim covered in grime, and flinched. The sight broke something inside him. It wasn't the fury of the fight anymore. It was the cold, hollow ache of his own past failures. He saw his niece in every single one of their faces. One of the traffickers, a handler who had been guarding the inside of the room, tried to rush the door with a knife. Silas didn't even blink. He caught the man's wrist, twisted it with a sickening crunch, and drove him into the wall. The handler slid to the floor, moaning. Silas loomed over him, his shadow stretching across the room. He wasn't gentle. He made sure the man stayed down, delivering a final, decisive blow that ensured the trafficker wouldn't be walking without a limp for the rest of his life. "It's over," Silas said, his voice cracking slightly as he turned to the children. He held up his hands, showing them his empty palms. "I'm not going to hurt you. You're going home." From outside, the sound of the brawl had died down, replaced by a new sound rising in the distance, the wail of sirens. Blue and red lights began to flash against the windows of the mansion. The police were coming to secure the scene, to make the arrests, to file the reports. But the Iron Kings had done the part the law couldn't. They had broken the doors down. Silas walked out of the holding room, stepping over the unconscious handler. He met Bishop in the hallway. The president was nursing a split lip, but his eyes were bright. "We got him?" Bishop asked. "We got him," Silas replied. They walked out the front door to meet the flashing lights, hands raised, ready to face the consequences, knowing it was worth every second. The flashing blue and red lights washed over the estate, painting the stone lions at the gate in alternating strokes of bruise-colored light. When the state police tactical team finally swarmed the driveway, weapons drawn and shouting commands, they didn't find a shootout. They found the Iron Kings standing in a line by their bikes, arms crossed, calm as statues. Behind them, on the manicured lawn, the private security detail and the men in suits were zip-tied with industrial cable ties, sitting in a neat, defeated row. Detective Martinez holstered her weapon slowly, her eyes scanning the scene. She looked at the battered traffickers, then at the open door of the mansion where the children were being led out by officers. She walked up to Silas, who was leaning against his bike, wiping a smear of blood from his cut. There were no handcuffs brought out. Not tonight. "You know I should arrest every single one of you for breaking and entering, assault, and about 10 other felonies," she said, though her voice lacked its usual bite. "You could," Silas rumbled, lighting a cigarette with steady hands. "But then you'd have to explain why a bunch of bikers found a trafficking ring that the department missed for 6 months." Martinez didn't answer. She turned as a sedan screeched to a halt past the police barricade. A woman burst out, ducking under the yellow tape, screaming a name that cut through the radio chatter. "Mia, Mia." Silas watched as the little girl broke away from a paramedic and sprinted across the gravel. The collision between mother and daughter was forceful, a tangle of sobbing and desperate clutching. The mother fell to her knees, burying her face in Mia's hair, rocking her back and forth as if trying to physically absorb the terror of the last few hours. Silas looked away, a lump forming in his throat that felt like swallowed glass. For 5 years, he had been haunted by the memory of the niece he couldn't save. Tonight, looking at that mother holding her child, the ghost in his chest finally went quiet. He hadn't balanced the scales, nothing could do that, but he had tipped them back toward justice. In the days that followed, the city shifted. The local news stations, which usually ran stories about the Iron Kings involving bar fights or noise complaints, suddenly had a different headline. "Biker gang saves children," flashed across screens in living rooms and laundromats. Anchors struggled to reconcile the mugs' shots of the past with the footage of burly, tattooed men carrying children out of a house of horrors. The narrative broke. People on the street stopped crossing to the other side when they heard the rumble of V-twin engines. Instead, they waved. 3 weeks later, the bell above the door of Sal's diner jingled. Silas sat in his usual booth at the back, nursing a black coffee. He was staring out the window, watching the rain streak the glass, lost in thought. The diner was quiet, the smell of bacon and old vinyl filling the air. He didn't turn around until he felt a small tap on his elbow. He looked down. Mia was standing there. She looked different, cleaner, lighter, the terror gone from her eyes, replaced by the boundless energy of a 7-year-old. Her mother stood a few feet back, smiling through tired but grateful eyes. "I made you something," Mia said, holding out a piece of construction paper. Silas took it carefully. It was a crayon drawing, crude and colorful. It showed a large, brown bear wearing a black vest, sitting on a motorcycle that looked more like a rocket ship. Underneath, in wobbly block letters, it read, "The Biker Bear." "It's you," she said, pointing to the bear. "Because you're big and scary, but you're soft." Silas stared at the drawing. The corner of his mouth twitched. Then the scarred skin around his eyes crinkled. For the first time in 5 years, the stone mask of Silas' tank Mercer cracked, and a genuine smile broke through. It wasn't a smirk or a grimace, it was a smile of peace. He looked at Mia, then tapped the drawing. "I'm keeping this. It's going right on the fridge at the clubhouse, next to the rules." Mia giggled and hugged his arm, her small head barely reaching his elbow. Silas rested his hand on her head, a silent vow that as long as he drew breath, nothing would ever hurt her again. As the camera pans out through the diner window, watching the giant biker and the little girl, the narrator's voice returns one last time, low and knowing. Sometimes the